freelance illustrator who's recently just achieved an MA in Children's Book Illustration at Cambridge School of Art. And clients including the National Trust, Nottingham Castle, and the Arts Council with work focusing on local history and local heritage. Please welcome Hannah Sawtell.
Well, thank you for coming today. Lovely to meet you all. I have got notes that I'm going to have to follow. Don't quite have the confidence to put these down. But today I will talk through my windy route, as I call it. I'm a freelance illustrator and educator, so in terms of the education role, I largely work as a lecturer at Nottingham Trent University on the MA illustration course and the BA graphic design course, which I'm loving at the moment. But I also deliver CPD sessions to schools, I deliver workshops in schools. I also do a little bit of museum work, which is one of my old roles, but that's gone down as the lecturing has gone up. So I have what you would call, therefore, a portfolio career. So I have my illustration and I have my teaching, and actually at the moment I wouldn't have it any other way. The teaching work does have an impact on the illustration work in terms of themes that I might work with or inspirations from working with students. It's a two-way relationship. And actually my husband, he's a composer, he used to teach and he's now just doing composing, but he misses the teaching and he's thinking about bringing that back in because, yeah, I think it's an enriching relationship. And there are, I suppose, creative seeds everywhere. That's the point. So I learn from students and hopefully students can take something from my experience. So today I will, as I said, talk about my windy route to where I got to. I now also have plans for the future of where I want to go off the back of my MA. And as part of that, I'll touch upon the elements that you have to juggle if you want to do a portfolio career, which is what I have. There's lots of bits to juggle, but it works for me, and my brain does flit about all over the shop, so I don't think I could have a set job. I quite like dipping in here and there. And then questions at the end. So, here we go. Windy route, part one. So my mum is an artist. She's still practicing and selling her work. I grew up in quite a creative environment. And so I suppose for me, art was there was never a barrier. And I see, like in schools, and it's the importance of education. You want to take those barriers away because it should be accessible to everyone, art. I think it's such an important role, and it's interesting what Jay was saying about cuts and cuts to arts funding and cuts in schools. It has a consequence. But for me, I was lucky, I suppose, in that my mum was a creative. She encouraged it. So from an early age, I kept sketchbooks. I was always making things. And sketchbooks has been, I'm not very consistent normally, so I'll take up Pilates or yoga, or I'll try and do something that's good for me. It lasts maybe a week at the most. But sketchbooks is something that I have been able to keep up from quite a young age. And I love sketchbooks. It's something that I'm going to come back to at the end. It was a little bit here and there. It was at university, then when I had kids. But then with my MA, as I'll talk about later, it became a more prominent feature. I now like to sketchbook every day. if I can. But I suppose, yeah, from that, out of that came, I suppose, the normal route that you would go if you want to follow a creative career. So GCSE art, after I did that, it was like A-levels, definitely was going to do art. It was never a question. Art Foundation, I thoroughly recommend anyone who wants to follow the arts route, if you can, to do an Art Foundation course. A-level art was brilliant, but still quite prescriptive. When you get to Art Foundation, you've got free rein for creativity and exploring. And then I did a BA degree in contemporary art, so not illustration. It was a little bit of art, a bit of performance. And then I graduated and I was like, oh, I don't know what to do now. Was a little bit lost at that point. And so I then did teacher training in art and design. I wasn't really cut out for teaching in secondary schools, but I don't regret having done it. There were a lot of skills that I took from that, and it's enabled me to teach in the way that is most comfortable for me in terms of working in museums, as I used to do, and now in lecturing. And so that's a good tip, is that actually whatever you decide to do, you will get something from it. And often the difficult bit is the deciding. But, and it's the bit before you've chosen. But once you decide, go for it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. You will get something from it, which is what I felt about my secondary teaching. It has helped subsequently. And then I had children. I have 2 children, and this is a drawing from one of my sketchbooks of my daughter. I was looking for some of my earlier drawings from when I was a child, but unfortunately I couldn't find them. So this is one along a journey of many years. And so when children came along, it kind of paused things, but it also refocused me in terms of what I wanted to do. As part of having children, I started reading to them picture books. So, did you enjoy picture books growing up? Yeah, I love picture books. And it was 2 things that came from that. One was that I revisited picture books that I loved as a child, and I remembered those. But also, not just remembering those memories of me as a child, it was also seeing new insights as an adult into the skill that goes into these books that look so seemingly so easy. There's such a skill, and there's layers. We just see the final layer, but there are so many layers that those illustrators go through to get to that final point. And this was one of the picture books that I enjoyed rediscovering. So have you heard of Judith Kerr? Do you remember this book? Tiger Who Came to Tea? I loved it as a child. I loved it because the story was this massive tiger that is quite scary came round for food. They didn't seem intimidated or scared by it. They invited the tiger in, had a lovely time. But the tiger drank and ate everything, and that meant that they had to go out for tea. And the bit that I loved was that she was in her pyjamas, and it was a change of routine. They went off and had food in her pyjamas and just put a coat on. But for me, as an adult, as well as loving that story that I'd loved as a child, it was the skill of Judith Judith Kerr as an illustrator that I really appreciated and valued. The colours that she used, the interactions between the characters, the composition. In terms of you're seeing a scene, like with the background of the setting of the high street, as alongside their relationship. So it's all those things that you're then appreciating. Another illustrator that I loved revisiting and rediscovering was Raymond Briggs. Do you remember? So Father Christmas, the Snowman's probably one of the most famous ones. What's the...
Fungus Bogeyman.
That's the one, yeah. As a kid, I always used to feel like quite cold, and I didn't really gel with that one. But I loved Father Christmas because partly he reminded me of my granddad. So he's slightly grumpy and not really wanting to go off and have to deliver all these presents. So I loved the humour as a child, and then as an adult, appreciated that even more alongside the brilliance of his illustrations and storytelling. Shirley Hughes is another illustrator. I don't know if you remember her. I remember this book as a child, Moving Molly. Especially as an adult looking at these, what I really valued and appreciated was how she would find stories. The stories were quite simple, day-to-day stories. So there was one, I think it's Alfie, where it's all about a pebble that he finds and that becomes his friend. And it's a very simple story, but for children, it's about their everyday and their being seen and represented in her storytelling. And the quote from Shirley, at that time there weren't many books for young children about real life, what it feels like getting up in the morning, going to the shops, having lunch, and so on. And the way that she captures those interactions between children and adults, there was a lot that I aspired to as an artist when I looked at her work. And then Lauren Child was an illustrator. Clarice Bean was one of her books. What are the other? I don't know if any of you remember any of her other books.
Two children. It was an animation on
Charlie and Lola.
That's it, Charlie and Lola.
Yeah.
That's the famous one.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved her illustrations. The way that she collaged and the line work. I hadn't seen anything like that before. And Lauren Child in particular had an impact on me in terms of thinking about going back into being more of an artist alongside teaching. So from that point, and this is where, when I talked about having children, it refocused me. I had friends that were creative in my community. We'd started to support each other in pursuing the more creative side of things. And I decided I want to take from that, looking at those picture books, and have a go myself in my own way. And this was one of the first pieces of work that I did. So I would use digital and analogue, which is sort of what I still do now. So line work, line drawings, on paper, scan them in, and I suppose you can see the influence there for Lauren Child. I would then scan pieces of fabric, a map, scan them in, photograph, and begin to digitally collage together. And then sell these as limited edition prints locally. Another one was Woollerton Hall, where I worked as a museum educator at the time. And as I would drive into Woollerton, have you been to Woollerton? I'm sure, at some point. I loved the view that you would see the hall in the distance, and especially when it was misty, it was quite magical. And so I decided I'd like to do an illustration, a limited edition print based on that view. So again, line drawings and then collaging. That was a paint wash and some photographs over the top. And then also around this time, this was based on the school that my children went to. There were 2 sites to it across a busy road, and so children would have to line up to cross over, which reminded me of an illustration from a poetry book that I had as a child. This one. So whenever I'd see them walking across the road, it reminded me of that. And I thought, oh, okay. Let's have a go creating something myself. And again, you can see scanned elements for the fabric. At this time, I quite liked keeping the white space, the line work, and just elements of colour throughout the illustration. So alongside illustrations of places, so there were quite a few that I would do, a bit like Woollerton Hall, documenting place. I then decided I wanted to return more to portraits. I actually prefer drawing people more than buildings. I like buildings, don't get me wrong, but people I find really interesting. So this was my way into getting back to that, was drawing portraits. And having more of a connection to what's important to me, my values. So for me, it was around the centenary of celebrating votes for women. So I think it's Annie Kenny she was loosely based on. And just keeping it simple, the suffrage colours with the purple, green and the white. And that was washes of watercolour scanned, laid over the stamps I really liked, so I put them in. Here's another one. So this is Zeros and Ones, it's called. It's based on Ada Lovelace, daughter of Lord Byron, so it's nice having that local connection. And she's credited with coming up with, is it binary code? I don't really know about this stuff, but
she wrote some early computer programs.
That's
for,
it.
yeah,
Thank you. Early
for a
computer
steam room engine,
programming.
it never really worked.
Was it with Charles Babbage? So this was the portrait that I loosely based it on. That's the one. I liked the fact that there was a local link, and she hadn't been celebrated at the time. So it's only in more recent years that there's an acknowledgement of her work that she did towards early computers. And here's another one. This is called Blue Veils and Golden Sands. I don't know, Doctor Who theme. Have you liked Doctor Who? Enjoyed it? Yeah. So this is a portrait based on Delia Derbyshire, who she came up with the sound, the signature sound of Doctor Who, using that light shade. There was a sound that she got from that, and reel-to-reel tapes, as you can see on the dress. So that's all the background is referencing Doctor Who. Again, another woman that didn't get the credit. I don't think she even got royalties at the time for her input into that. And she was one of quite a few women at the time who are now credited with forming the early foundations of electronic music. And so that, for me, was really important. So I suppose what I was exploring was how my values have an impact or feed into my work a little bit more. And here is Delia Derbyshire, the grandmother of electronic music. So how did I get my work out and about? How did people see it? Which is an important part of the role. If you want to be an illustrator, people have to see your work if you want to sell it. And so it's all about visibility, getting out there. So I would sell my work through shows like this one. Online, I set up a website, which I've still got, although it's changed over the years. Mainly those through two processes. So, yeah, shows were the big one for me, really, at this time, although I don't do them now. So, this is one. Lustre. I don't know if you've heard of that one. And it's been so locally and nationally. So I've gone, taken part in shows in London, Manchester, as well as locally. And these shows were really good. They were marketing as well as selling work. I'd have really interesting conversations as people would come and look at the work. People could see what I was doing, and off the back of this, I would get, that was where I then began picking up more personalised commissions, but also more commercial commissions. Here's an example of one of the personalised commissions. So on the stand, I'd have a little book, you can see, how do you do it like that, there, with all the examples of my personalised commissions that people could flick through. I wouldn't often get them at the time because they were more expensive, but people would then come back to me. And here's one example. And so that began to grow, and then again that comes back to a portfolio career. So there was my own work, there was commissioned work, and there was teaching. Schools, I got a few commissions through schools. This is one example. Often celebrating centenaries. So that have been open for 100 years. Businesses. So this was actually for the application pub. And I suppose through being present online, so as well as my website, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I then picked up bigger commercial commissions, so such as this one. So they were big maps with like little booklets that people could take away, and that was for 2 visitor centres, one in Liverpool, one in Northern Ireland. Here's National Trust one, Sawtell, so fairly local, and that was to celebrate the opening of one of their visitor spaces for the workhouse, the Furback wing. So that was one version, and that was the other version. Oh, I'll put the wrong slide in. Oh well. And here was another one for First Art, so local. I think, is that Mansfield? Yeah, so where the films were. So that was fairly recently as part of a poetry event. And then in Nottingham, as part of their reopening, their Riot and Rebellion Gallery, I was commissioned to do some artwork. This is just some examples of some illustrations for the Riot interactive displays in the gallery. So that was working with a London-based company as well as people working on on the display exhibition in Nottingham. So there you go, that one. And then more recently, this was the Arts Council funded Lost Words project, which was really interesting. It was about local words like cow lady or rorky on these displays, local dialect words, and then looking at the generic term or meaning for them. And this was, as well as the illustrations, it was taking these into schools and delivering workshops and projects around this. This is still ongoing. We're hoping to then turn it into a published book, but these things take time. So, example there. And then this was what's called live drawing. I'd never done it before, but again, this was picked up through social media. So I was putting up loads of pictures of my sketchbook work. Again, the importance of visibility and getting your work out there. And a curator at the Justice Museum got in touch and said, would you like to come along and document an opening of an event, an exhibition, just through drawing for, like, I think it was like 3 hours. I was like, oh, that was my absolute favourite thing to do. Just sit down, observe people and draw. And that led on to other events also at the National Justice Museum, doing the same thing. And then most recent commission was an interactive map. This was linked to the dialect project in that this was a map where you can shine your phone. I didn't know this bit, I just provided the drawings, but over an illustration, and then I think a VR code came up that would take you to a web link, and you could hear interviews with people talking about those areas and local dialect in relation to that. So that's available online. An example there. So commercial commissions and bespoke ones, they're kind of ongoing. They keep like ticking along, as well as I have a shop on my website, so that keeps ticking along. But in terms of my own personal work, around 2016, and I think this is a thing that happens, I got a bit bored. So it was like, I was at a point of, do I do something else now? I've done this for a few years. I'm not sure that I want to carry on doing it how I'm doing it. And it was at that time that I thought, I need to invest in my process, creative process. And that's another important thing to think about in terms of if you want to be an illustrator. You think about your audience and how your work would sell, but you also have to think about feeding your creativity and what interests you. And the more authentic that you can make that in terms of your link, actually people then respond to that. If there is an honesty in a way to your work and your creative connection. So that's why I decided to go and do an MA in children's book illustration. So it was down in Cambridge. It's a bit of a trek. It was once a week. But it was worth it. Although part of it was not interrupted, I still did it, but COVID. So I was doing my day a week remotely. But on this course, it just opened up the importance of creativity with a focus on sketchbooks and an exploration of process and making. And not only that, it's the importance of working with your peers working in isolation, you then get a little bit stuck. I think it's really important that you network and connect. And I finished the MA last year, but I still meet up with people that are either doing the MA or finished it, and we go out drawing together. Because we support each other. And creatives are very nice for that. So on this course, I learnt more about sequential illustration and how hard it is. So that's what I'm still learning, really. So this was one of my first projects, and it was literally just taking a character, putting them into a setting. And then this was a project. This particular artwork isn't in it, but it was a project for a book that I called Life on Mars. And this was about almost responding to COVID and the experience of that. So I used it as a metaphor. And that was something I learned on the course, the power of metaphor in storytelling. So in terms of going back to those days, do you have many memories, or have you just pushed it aside, those memories of COVID times when we were stuck in our houses? You couldn't go out. If you did, you had to put a mask on. That isolation with friends and family. How do you navigate that? What are those feelings like? And for me, I was quite into sci-fi. There was a film called Moon, and I thought that idea that you're stuck somewhere, you're stuck on a planet and you can't interact with other people. I stuck us on Mars. And to go out, it wasn't a mask, but it was a helmet and a whole spacesuit. So this was some examples of the artwork for that one. This was shortlisted for the Batsford Prize. If you were wanting to go into children's book illustration, this is what I'm currently exploring and looking into, is you have to submit your work to competitions, approach agents, approach publishers. So it's a whole different field to what I was doing before. And then another project was what I called Time Travel Tourists. So this was another dummy book that I came up with. And this was where, this goes back to, I think I mentioned it, the importance of like actually teaching, feeding into the art side of things. So as a museum educator, I was delivering history sessions, going back to the Romans, teaching children about the Romans, the Vikings, Mary Anning, fossil hunter. And we, in those sessions, it felt like we were time travellers. And I came up with this idea that we could be time travelling tourists, going back right to dinosaur times. How am I doing for time? I don't know, have I gone over or?
We've got about 5 minutes of the slide.
Ah, lovely, excellent. Here's a rough for that. Another element in terms of if you were wanting to go into illustration, you see that final work, and I now wish I'd brought it with me to show you, but there is such a process to get to there in terms of initial storyboarding, doing really rubbish pencil drawings and trying to get this idea out onto the page, working that artwork up, and then deciding how do you present it, what materials or media do you use. So it's a whole process that gets you to that final book stage. Another example. So this was a spread where the main character meets Mary Anning, the fossil hunter. And here is an example of the show, which was really good, but exhausting. I'm really glad I did it, but I had to sort of take a bit of a step back after I'd led up to this last year. And then this is more recent self-directed work. One example of a few where I wanted to narratively explore the different elements of an orchestra and how they work together. And this came off the back of, and this is what I'm currently exploring a bit more, my sketchbook work. So I had the opportunity of drawing in Air Studios in London while musicians were playing. And you had to just quickly draw them. It's quite good though with musicians because they often go back to that the same positions repeatedly, so you can then get more detail. But I started to, last year, and it's been my focus ever since really, I started to explore sketchbooks a bit more and make that a more regular part of my practice. Exploring materials, so often I would do a wash, mark it out first so you can explore the sequential, but then do a wash of colour underneath and then use a variety of different materials to then draw over the top. So that is neo colours, so oil pastels, acrylic markers, colour pencil. So yeah, it's sort of mixing it up a bit. Another example here, that was just neo colours. So I now like to take my sketchbook with me wherever I go. I do get a little bit, I don't know what to do with myself when I'm sat having a coffee, but if I have my sketchbook, I'm fine. So that was Bologna for the children's book fair that I went to last year. That's down by the River Trent. So that was emulsion paint, pastels and colour pencil over the top. And again, another wash here, that was down in Cambridge. Colour pencil, I think some marker pens, I can't remember. But that's part of the joy that I've discovered, it's mixing things up a bit. So I'll just leave you with a quote from a book about creativity. So from the point of view of one who creates, everything is a gamble, a leap into the unknown. So I'm still at that point. I'm still not quite sure in terms of the children's book illustration and my illustration part of my career. I'm still exploring, and it does always feel a gamble. It does feel quite vulnerable when you put your work out there. But if you've got supportive people around you, your peers, it's absolutely worth it. I really enjoy it. So there we go.
Okay, we do have a couple of minutes for questions if there is anybody who would like to put anything to Hannah before we break for the next speaker. Over there, and there's another one there.
Hello, it was a really interesting talk, sorry. Over here. Hi. I just wondered, I was thinking whilst you were giving your talk about sort of barriers to entry for the arts, and we've got people here, I'm sure, that do a little bit of everything. For me with filmmaking, the barrier to entry, if you're outside of college or university, to get hold of the equipment, get a film made, it can be quite expensive. But my question is for yourself as an illustrator or for maybe students here or people interested, what would you say is the barrier to entry for illustration? Is it quite low? Is it quite high? Because to me, I suppose the beauty of it is it can be quite simplistic. You've got your sketchbook and some pens, pencils, and that's all you need, really. But yeah, I'm just interested in your perspective on that.
Thank you, that's a really interesting question, and I'd like to see your film. That sounds great. Right up my street in terms of the importance of investing in the arts, not just financially, but in terms of time. And I suppose, like for me, you go into primary schools, and when I've worked with secondary school children as well, it's the number that say, oh, I can't draw. And it's like, well, that is something that you've picked up somewhere. And we invest a lot of time in terms of writing, but drawing, to me, is another way of writing. It's literally you're using a pen or pencil, you're making marks on a page. But for some reason, we invest in the writing for communicating, but not drawing. And if I was to have my way, I think in primary schools that should become part of daily practice in a way, to take away the fear. I think it's more in primary and secondary that you see it. I suppose when you get to A level, those that have chosen to follow an arts career have some level of confidence in their ability. But it's those that feel that they can't do it. I feel that's quite sad. So I think, yeah, that's the barrier. And therefore also, alongside that, for me, the importance of school visits to museums, to galleries. You see that being cut now, that there just isn't the funding for it. But, like, I used to go to galleries with my mum, so I wasn't intimidated. My kids, because I worked in museums, they would come along often while I was working, so they're not intimidated. But often, like in the museum workshops, sometimes it's the first time some children have come to a museum or a gallery, and sometimes there's an intimidation there, and I find that quite sad. It should be accessible to everyone, should be free, like it is in London. But there you go. There you are.
Hi, thanks for talking today. I was going to ask you about the publishing thing. You mentioned having to sort of basically almost like compete with lots of other people who do this sort of stuff. Is there a route to be able to do it yourself?
You can self-publish, but I think it's probably still more viable to get a publisher. And so that, in terms of the portfolio career, that takes time. So I did Bologna Children's Book Fair. I got interest from people. I then followed it up, but then I was also exhausted. It was a mix of, I was exhausted and I didn't feel like I was getting far, so I stopped it. But it's something that it's a job in itself, is that, you know, every week I should be, and I haven't for about a year, approaching publishers, approaching agents. And you can do it locally. There's Beam Editions, which I'm looking into for maybe more sketchbook work. So yeah, that is still, you can self-publish, but it's quite expensive. I might do some zines, so a sort of a self-publishing but on a smaller scale, and then sell them through my website.
I was thinking, like, because people want to try and do things on their own.
Yeah.
Is that the only path is what I'm asking? You know, I've considered in the past when I was younger, one of children's books and things like that.
Yeah, it's a hugely competitive field, and I think there is still kind of not a gate. Do you know there are kind of, you have to get in.
Yeah. Put the doors on.
Yeah.
We're going to have to end it there, but one more time, thank you very much.